1.
Awesome. Welcome to Endgame. Thanks everyone for coming. Tonight, it's just going to be me giving a talk about my research, which is treating substance use disorders using virtual reality. Again, if you guys have questions, you can stand in the middle. If not, then I would just stand outside so that people, so I know when someone has a question. And then, please feel free to ask questions throughout this. I'm going to be talking about some different concepts. And if you guys have questions about anything, please just don't hesitate to ask. I want this to be a dynamic discussion, and hopefully throughout the talk, you guys can ask some questions. So basically, the talk is going to be, I'm going to give some background about virtual reality in healthcare, challenges in general in treating mental health, how I think VR can help, and then talk about 2 brief studies that we did with patients, and then where I think the future of VR for addiction treatment and also mental health treatment is. And also just some background is that I went to UMD, got my BS 4 years at Maryland to get 2 years, and then doing research at the National Institutes of Health. And then I'm in my 4th year of my clinical psychology doctoral degree at Vanderbilt. So I'm not yet a psychologist or anything. I'm in training to become one though. So there's 3 more years, and then I'll be one, which will be good. It's long enough. So and what I'm focused on is how social VR networks can be used as telehealth interventions to treat mental health disorders. So on this show, we've talked a lot about how VR chat has helped people with different types of struggles and things like that, and how it makes them feel. So the idea is that what if we build interventions, and instead of going to a hospital into a psychiatric unit or to get therapy one-on-one or anything like that, what if eventually we could prove that it's just as effective to use your headset? We don't know that though, obviously yet, but that's kind of where the research can go, I think, in the future. And the key here is that if every therapist in the United States worked for 50 hours a week seeing patients, they'd only treat 12% of the people who actually need treatment in the US. So I think a lot of people are like, oh, is VR going to replace like in-person therapy? And it's like, in-person therapy can't reach all the people who need help. So we shouldn't even be having that conversation, I think, because people are very threatened, I think, by VR and healthcare and things like that. But and then addiction in the US. So addiction means substance use in this case. It's not necessarily addiction to the internet or things like that. That's kind of a separate category. This is like heroin, alcohol, cocaine, things like that. So there's 23.5 million people with substance use disorders, and then it just costs a lot. And only 2.6 million people seek treatment. So like 10% of the people who have substance use disorders actually seek treatment. And nearly half of them are doing it via self-help. So like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and stuff like that. And with relapse, so the key also, obviously the key is 72,000 people died last year in the US from drug-related overdose and things like that. And so with relapse, what's happening often is that, first of all, about 85% of people relapse within 1 year when they go to rehab. And like rehab is really expensive. It's like, it can be $30,000 to go to rehab, or the copay can be $4,000. So people are putting a lot of money in, and they're relapsing a lot. And when they get out of rehab, there's a lot of negative mood, basically. So when someone's first stopping using drugs, they're getting their life back in order. They're kind of coping with a lot of negative emotion. And so there's distress, and there's also kind of anhedonia. So there's like lack of interest. And so these things lead to relapse. They're kind of correlated with relapse through research they've found. So the more that there is of these things after someone has gone through rehab, basically, the more common these things are. And then also VR, I think, might be particularly effective because you can put on the headset at any time. So you don't have to wait till your next meeting or anything like that. You can just put on your headset and immediately be out of your world, into the therapeutic world, potentially. And how this works, so Immersion and Presence. Actually, I'm curious with thumbs up and thumbs down, like how many people have heard about Presence? Most of us are in VR, so I feel like, but yeah, use the curious. Okay, so we're all familiar with Presence and things like that. So the kind of definition that in the research context is that thinking, feeling, and behaving as if a virtual environment is real. So partly there's a kind of continuum of presence, and actually we all vary individually on how immersed we can feel or how present we can feel. And the like VR right now is actually not the full amount of presence. I think probably what the full amount of presence would be is like nanotechnology, where you actually think and you're in a different situation. You actually believe that you're in that like the Matrix, I guess, would be the ultimate level of presence. But the definition of it is very similar to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is like how we help patients with different things like substance use disorder. And this is the model right here. So basically, you have your environment, and then you have thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physiology that are all connected. So right now we're in this room, in this virtual room, and so the virtual environment is kind of competing with the real world in terms of like you guys are listening to what I'm saying, you're probably thinking about it, you're visually looking at this, you have certain feelings, behaviors, and physiology that's all connected in this environment. And so immersion and presence is very connected to therapy in a way because it's defining the model that we use to actually help treat people. And because this model, which I'll get to in a second, is actually how we treat different types of disorders. Because basically, you can't just decide not to feel anxious or anything or depressed or any of those kinds of things. But what you can do is that you can examine your beliefs, you can change your behaviors, or you can adjust your physiology. And basically, substance use is adjusting physiology in order to change the feelings. But it's just like it's a maladaptive behavior. And so that's how we help people kind of think about things differently or change their behaviors to get at substance use. But this actually is the case in any kind of negative emotion that you feel. This model kind of can apply to it essentially. Oh, I gotta erase that. Hold on. Yeah. And so basically with VR, it's really powerful for mental health. You can use it to expose people to negative stimuli, so put them in negative situations and expose them. It can treat PTSD. You can bring people back to a war zone and treat their PTSD from combat in 1 or 2 sessions. You can treat any phobia, create virtual stimuli, and they're as effective. Like a virtual dog, if you have a phobia of dogs or spiders, is as effective as a real dog or spiders in treating that in exposure therapy. And then also for drug use, you put people in bars and things like that. I've done therapy in the Great Pug before with patients. I bring them in and then I invite some friends in and they give them a beer. And the patient for the first time, while they're actually in inpatient rehab, can say, no, thanks, I don't drink anymore. And they're saying that to a real person. It's really powerful for them because they have, I'm just mentioning this, but they have automatic thoughts about that behavior, and that leads them to feel anxious and stuff when they go to a real bar. So that's kind of a way to help people. But anyway, I'm also focused on positive experiences. Sorry, yeah, Anime God, did you have a thought?
I just said interesting. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, it's okay. You guys also feel free to like shout out any questions or anything like that too. That's completely fine. Yeah, and so that's all negative stimuli. So we're exposing people to negative situations. Most psychologists, when they hear about VR and therapy, their mind goes to exposure therapy, which is what all these different things are. But all of us, we know that social VR is really like powerful for our emotions, and based on that presence, like this is what I think therapy really, I think could become. And I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, so I'm focused on like positive experiences, and that's what the study was about. So cognitive therapy with patients, when we're doing that, it targets beliefs, but those are easily overpowered by cravings. So it's like we teach people in rehab, we're like, when next time you want to use a drug, just try to think about the reasons why you shouldn't use the drug or don't want to use the drug, and then that'll help you prevent the behavior. But with behavior therapy, you actually have an alternative behavior to the negative one. And so putting on a VR headset could be a just-in-time alternative behavior for substance use. So in the moment you want to go to your liquor cabinet and have a drink, instead you put on the headset. That's kind of like an immediate kind of intervention. And so that's what we did with patients in rehab. We started working with them. And how many of you, I guess most of you guys probably recognize this as the Steam VR Home, hopefully. Although if you have an Oculus, you might not. No, actually, yeah, you can, because Steam VR, when you open Steam VR anyway. But I put the first page. Yeah, right. It turned off, or you turn it off because it sucks at performance actually, and then it's your computer is better. But my first patient that I put in, she was a detox patient. So I started working at this rehab center seeing patients, and it was her second day there, and her history, I was doing intake interviews, and she was my first intake interview ever of any addiction patient. And I started asking her, like, what happened? Like, how did you get here? And she said that she was using heroin in a hotel room with her whole family lived in a hotel room of 6 in one room. And her parents were using heroin and forcing her to do prostitution to get money for all of them to use their drugs, basically. And she was telling me this really intense thing, and she attempted suicide, and she survived and was transferred to the rehab center where I worked. And this was like, I was like, it was kind of an intense thing because it was like my first intake or whatever. But I was empowering her for being there. And then at the end, I was like, "Do you want to try some VR?" And she said, "Sure." And I put her before, so I was going to put her into like audio shield, tilt brush, just show her some VR and just see what the effect was. She was really upset when we were at the end. But when she went in the Steam VR home, she teleported out to the mountains and she was like, "Oh my God, I've never been hiking before, but this is so beautiful." And she immediately started like smiling and laughing, and just like this transformation of her mood, basically from really upset and withdrawn to smiling and laughing and just like this whole thing. And so then I put her in, a bunch of different apps like Audio Shield, Tilt Brush, Hollow Point, Space Pirate Trainer, Super Hot, Cyberpunk. We did like 30 minutes of these apps. And afterwards, she took off the headset and she was like, "All of my anxiety is gone." And the therapist who was supervising me and I looked at each other like, "Holy shit, we did not expect that to happen." So, yeah, it was a pretty striking moment. And so then I wanted to quantify that because I was like, here's an example. It's not just for exposure and making people feel badly so they can overcome. Exposure therapy is very effective, by the way. Like, you kind of help someone feel the thing that they're afraid of feeling, and then they kind of are able to move on past it and cope with that. And it's a really powerful thing. But VR, as we all know, can be so much more than that. And so we did this study and our hypothesis was that VR would increase positive and decrease. Yeah, catapult.
Like you were saying, like this lady that tried it and she was blown away, and then all her anxieties were gone when she took the headset off. I
Yeah,
can understand that the first few times you try it, and
yeah,
maybe even the first year, but after you've been doing it for a few years, it's kind of like it takes a lot more to wow you to get that wow effect
mm,
because you're
yeah,
kind of used to it.
yeah. Like you get desensitized a little bit to it.
Yeah,
Interesting.
kind of.
Yeah,
So like in that case, I guess you guys would have to follow a patient over, a multi-year period to see how they do. Like if they use VR to help cure themselves, to see that if that wow effect starts wearing out, and
yeah.
then it becomes to a point like why even bother?
No, that's a really good point. I mean, I think it's a question of like, what keeps people coming back to VR? And I think it does translate over time. We were all blown away by VR and then it came and then we did it. But then there's reasons we come back to VR over and over, and reasons you come back to VR even after years of being desensitized in the very way that you described, because this presents something other than reality that you can experience. And I think that if we are able to create that in a way that's compelling to people and that really it helps to heal them and things like that, that potentially, even though the novelty will fade, I think, yeah, that's a really good question and it comes up a lot. And it's really cool to hear. I'm curious if anyone else has thoughts too about that, because that's a very important question I get like almost every time I talk to people. But yeah, Gallium.
Oh,
Hey,
hi. It's been a while. Want to sort of
yeah,
just throw into that purely anecdotal based on my experience. The first times I tried VR, I found that it was doing incredible things for my depression. It was just it was like the equivalent of an entire week's worth of sort of like actually just exercise, going out and doing exercise 'cause
yeah,
that's usual. Because it's only mild depression I have, but it's still there. And I've been using VR for like 3 years now, and I still get the sort of depressive symptom management from it. But
wow,
the other thing I have noticed though that's relevant to this is that kind of wow factor of VR, because of how much and how long I've used it, yeah, that has worn off. But the subtler effects of, for me, it only takes about 20 minutes of VR a day to keep my depression in check. I
and
don't
what
get
is it
that
about
wow effect.
what is it
Mm,
about
go
the
on.
20 minutes that's actually helping, do you think?
I honestly have no idea. Like, even if I've had like a really shit day, I can just come home and either just play through have a few songs in Beat Saber, just hop in VR chat for a bit, or just faff around in Tilt Brush for a while. And about 20 minutes for me, about 20 minutes is all I need, and it'll stop me going
Yeah,
down, like a usual little depressive spiral.
wow,
So
that's
maybe
amazing.
So maybe it is that, yeah, the wow factor that's, really immediately apparent does wear off quite rapidly, but the subtler and more And in this, like in the case of what we're talking about here, the more important factors that it's the actual mental benefits that it can be providing, they may well just continue to persist. I don't know
Yeah.
how long.
Yeah. Well, that's that. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really awesome your experience. And I think like there's something called behavioral activation for depression, where basically you just engage in activities and get up and get going and get the dopamine flowing and the neurotransmitters engaged, and it's very effective. And I think even if real life activities, which lose their wow over time, like tennis, if you get used to playing tennis, like it's still a fun, like Beat Saber, it's still engaging. And so I think it's interesting because maybe the level of activity that VR provides has surpassed video games and other kind of technology, and now is at the point of actually mimicking real life activities in a way that can treat underlying depression and stuff like that. So that's cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, man. Yeah.
No problem.
Kat.
Hello. Sorry if
Hello.
you guys hear any background noise. My
That's okay.
grandparents are watching Big Bang Theory. So first off, wow, I never ever thought about using VR for that, but about what Catapult and William were talking about, once the kind of VR realistic aspect fades, like all of them start to go numb. Like my first experience was Reggie's Blank experience, and I flew around and like I felt like I could actually like feel myself being blown around. But after playing that, I gave my actual VR headset because I played that at the mall on an HTC Vive. Like when I played stuff like Echo, where you're like kind of just floating down towards different platforms, or when I play shooters, I kind of just go numb to the experience because my brain comes to terms that it's not real. So how like how long is it going to take you to search for a new experience that even the sensation of you're not actually there? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, this is really good. It's a really good question, and I think you're talking about presence kind of varying over different situations. And for you, and also as I like what I said before about presence is a continuum that is different for each of us. So that also might be kind of an element of that. So I think being here, it's like. Can you mute? Would you mind actually muting while you're not talking? Sorry, there's just a little bit of background, but it was fine. I could totally hear you though, so that's fine. But basically the presence varies across different people, and so your level of presence and immersion in like Echo Arena and things like that might actually be different from mine, and so there might be individual differences. That's what they're called, and that's actually the case of treatment. So, but also I think different things lead you to be present, like. Social situations lead to more presence for me, at least. Like I actually feel like I'm on the first time I was on Endgame, or one of the first times we had like a big crowd or something. Like my Apple Watch notified me and asked me if I was working out because it detected an abnormally high heart rate for my motion activity, and I was like, "No, I'm in front of a bunch of people talking." But yeah, but over time, like now, I'm a little bit more acclimated to it. So yeah, that was a really good question though. But yeah, I think it depends on each person. Yeah, Electro.
Hello. So I actually think of when people are talking about, becoming desensitized to virtual reality, I actually kind of think of VR as kind of like a drug. It works at first for a while, and then you gain a tolerance to it. But then even after a while, if you take a break from virtual reality, I notice that the tolerance kind of breaks, and my WoW experience actually goes back up. I noticed that for myself personally. I don't know about anybody else. Also, too, I wanted to bring up the concern of possibly virtual reality possibly not only helping people, but also theoretically it could be traumatizing to some people, depending on what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And honestly, some of the worlds around here are pretty freaking traumatizing. So
yeah. No, I mean, I guess here's a poll question: how many people thumbs up or thumbs down. So thumbs up if you know someone who's gotten to the point of being very upset, extremely upset, like crying or anything like that from something that happened in VR chat. I'm just curious about that.
I'm not to get personal, but I might have.
Yeah. It's intense. VR chat can be really intense, and I think that's part of the. You're totally right. There's drawbacks to the. Look, it mirrors real social interactions, but people are anonymous, and so that leads to a very. And the presence here is different than a forum or someone typing to you, and things like that. As Zarni Whoop so nicely said, I'm like a year from this past Valentine's Day on that episode, but you know. The difference between that and this is that if there's a troll, they're talking, you feel like they're talking to you, and especially if they're on desktop and you're in VR, they don't realize how present you actually feel in the virtual reality. And so I think
that's
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh yeah. And yeah, you're right. Whenever a troll comes up to me and tries to bother me, not that I react negatively, but I kind of feel more of an impact, like a feeling on the inside, like more like the person's right there. And,
It's real,
you know,
yeah.
And yeah, but when you're on desktop, it's a little bit different. It's like you're messing around. In fact, I have a totally different feeling on desktop, and not different personality, but different showing of a different emotions when I'm in desktop mode versus VR mode.
Yeah.
I mean, I try not to do that, but I kind of feel like that. You know, I have a different feeling. But
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was really, I think you made a really good point. So yeah, anime god.
Okay, so one thing I have noticed is I've only had VR for a week, and I've noticed that my anxiety has gone way down. And I used to take medication and other stuff for my anxiety. Wait, one sec, my phone's going off, sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry. I used to take
It's okay.
medication and other stuff like that, but it just wasn't working out, and I get panic attacks pretty regularly often. But one thing I've noticed in the past week is that just having a social interaction with people has helped me out tremendously. Like, I realized that I haven't even had, major anxiety the past week, which for me is actually really helpful because I've been able to get work more efficiently and other things like that. So, yeah, that's just what I want to share about it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for sharing that. And I hope that continues. And I think the social connections and the strength of the bonds that we make in here surpass the immersion and the technology. And that's why on the DK2 it was just as powerful to be in social VR as it is now. At least for me, like it's so powerful. And so even though the novelty might fade, I think the social connections will stay. And so those are helpful. And you guys are actually, so this was the hypothesis for the research project, but so many anecdotes here that it's like, we already know this is like kind of confirmed, but in science, we do have to collect data and actually, analyze it and kind of have a random sample and stuff. So that's what we did. At an inpatient rehab center, it's like 30-day rehab center that patients came to. They did 30 to 60-minute sessions of VR games. We started out with 30 minutes, and then patients actually said that it wasn't long enough, and they wanted to do it for longer, like playing all the different games. So I was like, okay, we'll do 60 minutes. Single arm trial, so there was no control group, so we didn't compare it to anything. So the results here are just about this population. We can't say that we know VR caused the change in mood, although I think it's strongly implied. And we did 241 patients. So I had 10 people. I ran like a study basically with 10 research assistants from Vanderbilt who went down and they drove in 4-hour shifts and ran patients in virtual reality for 241 patients over a period of like a year and a half. And we tracked their mood. So this is called the positive and negative affective schedule. I don't know if you guys can see that, but and feel free to come closer if you got. There is a barrier, a security barrier here, but feel free to come closer if you need to, because I'll show a graph in a second. But basically, this is 20 emotions, and there's 10 positive and 10 negative emotions here. And you just rate them from very slightly or not at all to extremely. And so that's kind of how the measure works. And I had people fill this out right before and after the 30 to 60-minute sessions of just playing recreational VR and everything. And so here's what we found is that when they reported their positive mood, basically the 10 positive emotions on here it went from an average of 3.28 to 3.94. So like it increased, and then the negative mood decreased. And these effect sizes were medium effect sizes. So Cohen's D down here, it's actually called Cohen's D, and you want it to be large in science. So we have lots of jokes about that in statistics, but yeah. Yeah, but Cohen's D was a medium size, which was actually significant, and so it's really good. Yeah, actually, hold on. Let me just go to the next slide. Save right
Yeah,
there.
sure.
Let me just show
Yep, go
also,
for it.
if you break out every single individual emotion, all of them increase significantly. So it wasn't just that someone was like interested or excited or strong. So it's interested, excited, strong, enthusiastic, proud, alert, inspired, determined, attentive, and active. Those are the positive emotions, and every single one went up as a result of VR. And then also the negative emotions, distressed, upset, guilty, scared, irritable, shame, nervous, jittery, and afraid, all went down. And except, so hostility was the only one that actually didn't change at all. And that's because there was very little to begin with. So that means my research assistants were not making the patients hostile, and I'm very happy about that. That means I trained them, hopefully. No, but they were also really good. So, but yeah, Gallium, what's your question?
Well, a little while ago, on a much smaller scale, I tried something basically like this with also a much smaller sample size. I think it was about 10, and
Oh, cool.
it was using a different scale. I cannot remember the name of it, but I think it was the name of it was like related to a city in Scotland. Like
okay.
But it was like it wasn't so much like just focused on emotions. It was more a thing. It kind of was, but the wording was different. Like there was one where it's like I've been feeling useful, and you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. That was one of the questions. But I got the same kind of. It was the same kind of results. Sort of the things that were positive went up, things that were negative went down. And
yeah.
But with me, the other difference was that it was only 10 minutes in VR when I was trying this.
Wow, that's interesting.
Like the 30 to sort of 60 that you were doing.
No, that's really interesting. I think that's a really good point, that especially for people's first times, I think you could probably do it for a short period and get that and change it. And that's really cool that you did the similar study. We should talk more about that at some point.
Yeah,
I'd
definitely.
be curious to hear the details and everything, because that's but yeah, I think these sessions could be shorter. But we do have some quotes from patients as well, which I'll get to in a second after we get to because I want to hear you guys' thoughts about the quotes as well. Yeah, Phil.
Is this questionnaire standardized? So like, can you compare it to like before and after exercise or something?
Yes, you can definitely do that. So that's a really good idea, and I think we're going to do that. That's a next step. So I'm about to publish this study. It was like my master's thesis, but this is a standardized questionnaire, which is so cool about it. So you can have that before and after any activity and compare how VR compared to it. Yeah. So we're going to do that in the future for sure.
All right.
Yeah, that's a good study. Spooky.
So you measured their emotion and like their mood, but I was wondering if you recorded their like what experience they were having.
Yes.
And, like, if you didn't, who determined what they played?
Oh, sorry. You're talking about what experience? Yeah, what they. So we had a standard. So we had a standard set of experiences that were like 6 apps, and we put them through each one, like Hollow Point and Tilt Brush, Audio Shield, things like that. Back when Audio Shield had its YouTube search, so it was actually really great for patients because they could choose a song that was inspiring to them and stuff. But thanks licensing music companies that took that out. But they could then choose what app they would. If they got bored of the first app, then we allowed them to move on to the second app. But if they wanted to stay in the first app for 60 minutes, then they could do that. That's fine.
Was your goal to try to make them have a positive experience? And if that was the goal, do you think you could have the same results if you were intentionally trying to make them to have a bad experience?
Yes. So actually, what
Does
you're
that make
talking
sense?
about, yes, that's a good question. And basically, exposure therapy is intentionally making someone have what they would consider a bad experience so they can overcome that really bad experience and get better. But I also think and this has come up earlier, that there are trolls or bad experiences that you could have to target to create. And I think, with eye tracking, which the HTC Vive Eye, and we know Facebook's working on that, software developers will have more ability to induce certain emotions, including bad experiences. So, yeah, this is a really good question. So before we get to the quotes, because this also explains what was happening, the quotes explain what's happening. Here's the cognitive model again. It's a little bit different, but again, so we have our environment, which is this circle. and we have thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physiology. And so VR is increasing positive mood and decreasing negative mood. And in therapy, so like I said before, in therapy, in cognitive therapy, what we do with patients, cognitive behavioral therapy, is that you can't just decide not to feel anxious or depressed or anything like that. But the three things you can do in therapy are you can learn how to examine your thoughts. So what are the automatic thoughts going through your head that are leading to anxiety? You can adjust your physiology with medication or with substance use disorder that's actually using substances, or you can change your behaviors, which is trying something new. Well, basically my research and the theory that we've developed is that, and I'm submitting this for publication right now, but is that a fourth way is that you can immerse people in an environment like virtual reality and actually change this underlying feeling and actually change the whole context. You can change the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physiology by a virtual environment. And so that's kind of what we're focused on for our therapeutic intervention and everything. So yeah, that's kind of, but I think the key thing is also what are patients actually experiencing, as was just asked. And so we basically interviewed 21 of the patients, and we had 10 standard questions, just asking them about their experience. And I just want to read you guys two of the patients and their experience. But first, basically, we also asked them how long did the effects last, because that's often a question that's asked. So here you can see that longer than a day. At the top, the blue is the longest period that we asked about, but the most frequent is that people said it lasted multiple hours. So they said that for them, the virtual reality, the effects of the VR lasted about, a few hours. And then also most people also said they weren't sure. There was an unclear duration, and that's actually consistent with sometimes people have a lot of trouble tracking their mood and being aware of their mood and how it's changing. And so that's a skill that people develop over time. And this population often has actually some trouble with that. So that's actually not, that's kind of consistent with some of the stuff we've seen. But yeah, so two people, I just want to read their experiences. Margaret, she was 28 years old, female. She is addicted to opioids, which is heroin, and cannabis, marijuana. She had major depressive disorder, an unspecified anxiety disorder, and also a personality disorder. So she had a lot going on. And she said, being able to paint for a little and be as free and open as I wanted to be is satisfying. We get caught up in our heads a lot, and it's hard to get out of them. VR was true freedom, expressing myself fully without any judgments coming, even from myself. Just literally feeling and being in that moment. It allows me to just have fun and enjoy doing something other than being in reality. It's like a mental vacation, but a really cool vacation. And so, I mean, Gallium, when you're talking about being in tilt brush and stuff, I mean, I think that's like a similar kind of things, I think, for all of us when we're in VR. I mean, I think this kind of describes some of my experiences of VR and getting so engaged in something that you just forget about reality.
Yeah.
And for, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying the consistent thing when I was doing the little test was Tiltbrush was the only program that I used. It was 10, sometimes a little bit like 15 minutes of Tiltbrush. That was it. Like nothing else.
Yeah, and it helped. It helped people. Exactly. And so the other patient that I want to read is John. He was 22 years old, male. He was using alcohol stimulants, so like things like Adderall. It was meth. He was using meth and alcohol, benzodiazepines, which are kind of and some anxiety medications that people can sometimes get addicted to. Xanax, and then cannabis, marijuana. And he had a history of childhood sexual abuse, neglect, and homelessness. So he had a lot of deep things going on. And by the way, I haven't had a single patient who didn't have really intense things going on. People don't just get into heroin for fun. It's because they're coping with negative emotion due to something in real life. But he said, it tricked my brain. It made me believe I was in another world. I had to focus and see something else instead of my current situation in life. On the walk back up after doing VR, so he's going back to his house, I felt good. I was in some sort of state of bliss. I felt more positive and comfortable. My anger and anxieties went down. Then you come back to the house and somebody is complaining about something stupid. It's like, dude, what is there to complain about? And this is a really important thing because there's something called reactivity, which is like how reactive people are to negative situations in their environment that occur. And what he's saying here is that his anger, anxieties went down, but also he was less reactive. So somebody was complaining and kind of what normally would have pissed him off or made him angry. He was just like, what's there to complain about? He was kind of in a relaxed mood. Pika. Hey.
Oh. Hello.
Yeah,
Okay, there you go.
I was just wondering, because a lot of this can be attributed to an experience like novelty, like something that they've
Yeah.
never experienced before. And obviously, if you've never done anything before, it is going to be very rewarding the first time you do it. It is a very
Yes.
unique experience. How much do you think that equates into the data that you gathered?
That's a really good question, and it's funny. I said before, so I know I think you got here a little bit later, and so it's funny because I said every time I give this talk, at least someone asks the question, and so it's so funny that you're asking this because it's proof. It's like it's such a question that it's important because we all think about novelty as a key thing. Hey, Deep Rifter, we all think about novelty as a key thing. Deep Rifter, by the way, I'm calling him out because he was one of the first people that I ever talked about psychology and VR in the DK2 days. So yeah, a lot of it's yeah, I'm excited to see you here. But Pika, basically what we were talking about is that the novelty wears off, but the experience is doing the activities and stuff like that doesn't wear off. So that's an important thing that seems to happen, and so those activities become therapeutic. Yeah. But
Okay,
good
yeah.
question.
Sorry, I got here late.
No, it's okay. No, it's funny. Oh, it's good. Yeah, Catapult, did you have a quick comment?
Yeah, did you ever put any of your patients in Google Earth?
Yes, that's a really good question. So I did put them in Google Earth. And what does everyone do when they go into Google Earth? What's the
Home.
first
Okay,
place
go
that people
home.
go? Yep, you go home. And so,
Yeah.
I went as
Yep.
far away from home as I could.
see, that's it. Okay, so
Oh.
individual
That's what I was
differences. There you go.
gonna
That's it. Yeah, but it's interesting because what happened is that I started showing patients, right? I only did it with 2 patients because when I did it, they went home through Google Earth. The first patient saw this beautiful scene in Colorado, like of a mountain and like a lake and stuff like that. And he was like, I'm so inspired because this is where I'm going when I get out of rehab. And I'm so excited and I can visualize it and it's motivating me. The second patient, when she went home, and so I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to show Google Earth to patients. Like it's great. She went home and it was the house she grew up in where she was abused. And it was a huge trigger for her. And she was really upset. And that could be a therapeutic intervention potentially, to take that and target exposure with that, like we've talked in the past. But it was an unintended effect because I was trying to help improve her mood and not necessarily focus on that. But it drew out. So that's the kind of thing that in therapy, you have to be very careful with the stimuli that you expose people. And that's a question that was asked before about can things negatively influence people? And look how easily just a 360 picture basically could do that to someone. Yeah, Catapult.
Yeah, that going back in Google Earth to where she
Oh,
was
oh.
There you go.
abused.
That was okay. Sorry, your voice
Sorry.
was strange for a second. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know why it's doing this, but anyway, wouldn't that be kind of like facing your fears?
Yes. In the right context, it would be. But if you're taking someone back to the home they grew up in when they were abused, she didn't expect that because it was like her first time in VR, and so she didn't expect to be back at that house. And so that's why it was a negative kind of adverse event because you want to prepare a patient to have that experience as opposed to kind of springing it on them all of a sudden in surprise, basically.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. But also these are some other quotes that people said, like, and a big one is that I'd rather reach for a VR helmet than a beer anytime. I think that's a really powerful one. People said it, escaping their mind, being in a state of bliss, not having, and then someone who had PTSD said it was so calm and relaxing, he doesn't have to think about the nightmares and things like that he had. So it was really powerful for him. And yeah, so the next step in this, though, is to explore therapy in social VR, which is what we're in right now. And the question is, how can we use social VR to actually do therapy with patients? And so therapy in social VR, I started doing that with patients, bringing them into VR chat, actually. And one patient said, when I brought her into VR, she said it caught her attention like Disneyland. We were able to go to a bar and do exposure before she left. People were more comfortable opening up. And when I did therapy with them, it stuck with them. It was more effective because they were calmer. Someone called it an authentic version of benzos. So she said, benzos just numbs my anxiety, but this actually helped it and treated it. And then also helping people to get out. And people could concentrate better in a crazy world than they could in a therapist's office, which I thought was very interesting because I would have expected like all the stimuli to be distracting, but no, they were calmer and they were more present and more focused on the therapy session. And you can also measure a lot of things. So this is why, this is a huge interest, I think, for a lot of, eventually, all of the eye tracking, the motion data, everything is going to be collected. and analyze eventually. But right now, you can track things like movement data. So you can track like how people are moving in the environment. And you can track location. So this is a study we did for social anxiety, but this is right now we're all generating this data in this virtual environment. So it's just the XYZ position. Like, so if the ground is a graph and there's an X and a Y axis, and the Z is kind of our height. We're all in different positions in the room. And so, for example, right now you can track that there's a semicircle facing me and people are oriented towards me. So could you understand what's happening in the social situation? Gaze tracking, where people are looking in the environment. So we had a social anxiety experiment here. So we looked when they're looking at the prompt, when they're looking at the automated avatar, when they were looking at the instructions, every millisecond of and this is just head movement, but imagine when so gaze tracking, like, but imagine with eye tracking, you'll really be able to know what people are paying attention to. And actually, there's been a study for anxiety that had head movement. They had this table with automated avatars on it, like bots, and you had to give a talk to a boardroom, and they actually had, or you had to stand up and give a talk, and they tracked just the pitch, yaw, and roll of the headset. So they just tracked like where people were looking. So up and down, side to side, and kind of lateral movement. And so these are the graphs. So what they tracked is something called variance. So it's like the change in the movement. And so on the left, so they compared healthy controls to people with high levels of social anxiety. And so on the left are people with high levels of social anxiety and the average amount of head movement that they were making. And on the right are people without social anxiety and the head movement that they were making. And so you can see that you can actually, just by head movement, potentially track underlying emotion. And that's actually something that the theory was that people with social anxiety have more threat. They're activated, so their body is more activated, their heart rate is higher, and they're more vigilant, so they're looking around more because it's kind of a natural response evolutionarily to kind of be more active. So in that situation, so that was kind of what we. This is just a different study that happened. Yeah, Pika, did you have a question?
Yeah, is this data public? The animation community would be very interested in this.
Yeah, so Andrea Stevenson-Wan, who I hope to actually have on Endgame, she's awesome. She's at Cornell and does really cool research. This is a paper from 2016. So just message on Discord and like the Endgame channel and tag me and just ask me for the paper and I'll post it there.
I know a lot of animators would be very interested in studying this data.
Yeah, for sure. That would be cool.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I can connect them to her as well. So, or you.
Okay.
Her,
Yeah,
whatever,
you're probably gonna get
a colleague.
like feature animators like Pixar and Disney. Oh.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Okay. Yeah. There's also voice analysis. So this study was they gave people MDMA, so like what people call Molly. They gave them meth, low amounts of meth. And they had a placebo, like just a pill that was sugar. And they asked them to talk about someone who's important to you in life. That's it. That was the prompt for 5 minutes. And so they took the words and they created these maps of how each concept related to each other. I think this was differential language analysis. I'm not sure the exact method that they used because I'm still learning about these methods, but they basically were able to analyze this data and the graphs here. So they had PBOs, placebo, so that's like the white one. And then MDMA, they had two different amounts, which are these two middle ones, and then on the right is meth. And basically, these are the different topics that they talked about. And the star means that they were significantly different. So basically, when people were talking about compassion, you could tell that they were on meth. Or when they were talking about empathy, you could tell that they had taken a high amount of MDMA. Rapport, so they talked about the rapport that they had with the person. I guess that's also MDMA. So it's just kind of interesting. Intimacy, friends, stuff like that. So they could actually reliably predict who was on what substance based on asking a very open-ended question. But also there's limitations and risks to this and everything. This is a non-randomized study, so that's a big issue. We don't know that the VR caused the changes in mood. Could people become dependent upon VR? I think all of us probably are, we're like, well, might be dependent upon VR. Yeah, it's like, oh, no one becomes dependent on VR.
I couldn't live without it at this point.
Yeah, but also, what does that even mean? Like, could someone become dependent on Pilates or yoga or socializing with their friends. Is that a negative thing? I think the question is, will it start to interfere with function? Like going to your job and having friends and stuff like that. That's a big question. But this is just novelty. You guys have brought that up several times. That's a really important question. But the thing I'm most concerned about is overdose risk. So we know that with we're treating people who used to be on heroin, and if you relapse, so basically the reason that so many people have died as a result of the opioid overdose crisis is because oftentimes there's two ways. One is that the concentration is much higher through like fentanyl and things like that. But also what's very common is that people try to quit. They try to stop using the drug. And when they do, their tolerance goes up much faster than for other substances. And so when they use the drug, after being abstinent for 3 or 4 days, they use just as much as they were before, but then it kills them. So something else that can lead to that is that they found that if someone uses a drug at their home and they were using heroin at home before and they use it again at home even after a few days, they're less likely to overdose. But if they're in a new environment, like they go over to someone's house that they've never been to, and they use heroin there, they're at an increased risk for overdosing. And so with virtual reality, what happens if someone's at home and relapses and puts on the headset, and they wouldn't have died if they had not had virtual reality, but they had VR, so they put on the headset, they're in a novel environment, and they lead to an overdose? That's a really big question, and it's a limitation and concern that I'm very aware of as we try to treat, these things, and it's important to kind of think about. But yeah, lastly, so the last part of this, just a few more slides, is that I think affordable VR now with consumer VR, how all of us are in here, it means accessible mental health. So before virtual reality was $20,000 and it was in a lab, and now it's accessible. The Quest is $400. People can use it at home. For therapy, barriers to therapy include the amount of money it costs, how much time it takes to go, stigma, also that it's just once a week. Like how, it being once a week is not enough, I think, sometimes, and then you have to wait for the appointment. But I think virtual reality is standardized, it's more accessible from home, and it's therapeutic. So I think that it might be the future of mental health treatment. And basically what happened is that I got this travel award from the National Science Foundation for $50,000 that kind of last year, about a year ago. And so I could only spend it on travel. So I was traveling a lot over the past year. Yeah, PETA. Pika. Wow. I just said pita.
About pita's fine.
Pita.
It's Greek bread, right? Pita.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about like the whole like dependency and overdosing. Like, I run a community of like Shibas, and I've had several like community members tell me that, oh gee whiz, like at the end of the day, I can't wait to run home and be a dog.
Yeah.
Like, is that a concern?
Well, I mean, I think disorder is defined by quality of life, function, satisfaction, and things like that. And I think that
I understand if your only engagement with people all day is being in an office job and then everyone communicates via email, what kind of communication system is that?
Exactly. And I mean, it's a question. It's really it's a question as a society. Like, I think, being judgment free and letting people, if they want to be a dog, they want to be a dog, like, whatever. I think that if people start avoiding real life commitments or relationships in order to do that because they're not a dog in real life, that's where it can potentially become a little bit of a problem. And it's really individual for each person, though. Like, I don't think it's necessarily a problem that someone's excited to come home and do VR, because also it's not just becoming a dog, right? It's the social interaction in VR. Like, as everyone else has talked about, it doesn't matter what your avatar is. It's that you're connecting to other people and having social experiences. The avatar is just pixels, really, but the connection that you have to other people and the conversations and interactions you have are the things that are actually meaningful. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a problem, but I think other people might be judgmental potentially of it. But
I mean, you look at what happened in Pittsburgh over the 4th of July weekend, which is a fantastic time. You should come sometime.
What was the 4th of July? I'm really afraid to ask, but
yeah, clue us in. Let's hear it.
Anthrocon is a big giant furry convention. Everyone dresses up as animals.
Well, I'll see you there next year, man.
Oh, hell yeah!
Awesome. Yeah, a good question. Yeah. Yeah. Dirkhill, did you have a question too?
Actually, it was a question along with a bit of like a statement, I suppose. I'll keep it the question mark though. So, like, Question is, as this gets on, do you believe that there's a possibility in your studies that you've been able to find out there'll be a less of a chance that there'll be folk in more rural areas losing their ability to keep themselves due to the fact that there's more accessible sources of virtual reality or escapism, as you may put it? Because a lot of, and this is now the point where it's more of like a statement than a question, but it adds to this question I asked, is that if any of you have ever seen the movie Trainspotting, Scotland had a huge heroin problem in the late 90s, especially due to the fact that there was no escapism in Scotland. It was pretty much just a lot of folk dealing with a lot of heroin and opium, and there was no way to get out. There was you walked around town and you knew folk that did it, but nowadays there's a way to get out other than moving out, and that's the question: is that do you believe that as that moves on, not just Scotland, just other parts of the world that are rural, a lot more chance you feel like, especially since you put some time, money, effort, and innovation into the idea that as this goes on, there'll be less of a chance of that, just due to the fact.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think escapism helps because that's what drug use is. So I think people are probably finding VR that might help them not use drugs in the first place. But especially what we're going to be doing is targeting rural areas because that's where the opioid crisis is the worst. I'm in Tennessee right now, and that is a huge issue in rural Tennessee. And I think that people at our clinic, some people drive 3 hours or they take 3 hours of public transportation of buses to get to their daily programming and back. 6 hours of transportation and 3 hours of programming, so 9 hours a day. It's a full-time job just to try to stay sober. And so VR, I think, is going to change that significantly.
And that within itself, I could imagine it could eventually add up to a point where one VR headset will be equated to like a 2 months worth of public transport just to get that done. So
yeah. So good question. Good question. Electro, yeah, and also we can talk more about this. We'll do Electro, and then I only have a few more slides, and then we'll be able to have an in-depth conversation too. Yeah, good.
So I was gonna ask, like, how would VR affect neuroplasticity? Because wasn't there like one? I don't know if I don't know if I got this correct. I might actually be forgetting, but ironically, could because the VR. But there's actually one science article I thought I read that doesn't VR actually affect like the brain negatively, and like I know it's weird because like they didn't strap headsets to rodents or anything, but like wasn't like a in vitro study or something, or in vitro, that's what it is. Wasn't it like a
I think I've recently read something that might be along the lines of what you were thinking. It wasn't an actual VR headset, but they created a virtual environment for rodents, and they were observing.
Oh yes.
I think it was one where they were looking for, or they found patterns that were somewhat similar to dementia, or something.
It seems very flawed.
It's hard. I mean, it's a cave system, so they use.
I'm also probably describing it terribly.
Well, let's think about a baseline for those rodents. They're already in a cage. So they're not living a full life of a rodent where they're out in the wild, they're getting mates, they're fun. They're in a cage the entire time. So obviously these rodents are like, fucked mentally. They're not like, your average healthy rodents. And now you put in a screen in front of them the entire time.
Well, it wasn't even just a screen. It wasn't the system that was described was, it was actual like a full 360 projection system to
cave system.
from the they also had free movement too.
But
it makes no sense. It makes no sense. I'm not comparing rodents like with the mental kind of capacity.
This gets into biology of the anatomy. The scientists expect the rodent's eye to act as essentially like a human eye. All right, a rodent might have a different structure in their cones and rods. They might view the screen differently than a human does. So if you put an LCD screen in front. Yeah,
this is a good question. But I think that the key here is that with neuroscience, you have to basically they're comparing the absence of the effect to the control condition is a cage. So that's a really good point that it's not valid of what a rodent would experience in real life. However, you can still measure what they're measuring is not the life of the rodent, it's the impact of VR. And so you can look at, you can compare it basically to a base state where they're kind of not stimulated at all because they're in a cage, they're kind of bland, they've kind of acclimated and desensitized to the environment, which is totally, it's not a real representation of the real world. But then when you put the VR there, then they're able to actually go in, you're kind of seeing the brain differences. And I think they found it was pretty impactful, but there's limitations, of course, to the.
But how do you know a rodent, like a rodent with a rodent eye and rodent optics, actually perceives an LCD screen or whatever screen they use the same way as a human does?
I think the same area.
For instance,
share
a
areas
rodent
of the
could
brain, I
perceive.
think.
Yeah, but like no, but I'm talking about the molecular makeup, like the different cells of the rodent's eyes. They might be attuned to different wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum that our LCD screens are attuned to us. Like, you have to understand, every screen that we've ever produced, they're tuned to the structure of our eyes. How do you know that another creature, another creature on planet Earth, is going to see the same image that we see from a screen?
Yeah, well, you'd have to. That's a really good question. You have to present stimuli. If, for example, if you present a virtual cheese in the virtual environment, does the rat's neural response mimic when they see real cheese? And you can actually start to understand what they're inferring from the virtual environment.
Because our screens that we have a very specific wavelength of our RBG, red, green, blue, and because those peak at very specific levels, it tricks our eyes into thinking that we're seeing something. A rodent's eye might be attuned to different wavelengths.
Yeah,
So
let's get back
do you
to.
think it's invalid that they came up with that result? Then is that what you're saying? I don't understand. Is
a rodent
study invalid?
A rodent might not be tricked by a screen. A rodent just might see a bright light.
Stimulated.
How do you know that?
I think the whole point is the fact that we're not tricking. We're not trying. Humans are different. We're not tricking ourselves. You know, we know what is fake, what is real. Rodents don't know. They don't know what's real or fake. The thing is, we know what's VR. Yeah, sorry, Psych.
I think no, it's okay. I think this is an interesting conversation. I think the best next step for this is really to find the study and post it in Deep Thoughts, and we can actually read it all, and then we can talk about it, because I think none of us have. We need to look back at the study, and then I think I'd love to have this conversation, but we also need to be a little bit more informed, all of us, about the method, how they were capturing the neuroimaging, what the virtual environment was, and all that kind of stuff. Then we can come back to this. But I want to get back to electro real fast, because we're almost to the end. I know it's been about an hour almost, and then we can also have a little discussion after we get through. But yes, neuroplasticity can be facilitated through VR, and also they've done studies with dementia as well, where they have patients who are kind of withdrawn and things like that, and they activate new networks by putting the virtual reality in patients in scenes, and they actually, after they come out, they're more talkative, they're engaging, and it completely changes their behavior. That's one area. But neuroscience is also not my specialty, and I have a lot to learn in that area. So it's I know a little bit about it, but obviously not my specialty. But yeah, it's a really good question about neuroplasticity. So yes, thank you. I know we got off a little bit, but this is really good points. I like the conversation. So just a few more slides just to mention. So basically, I traveled around the country for I went to 100, or no, so I bought all this stuff. Like I did 150 interviews with people and demoed 150 times in VR chat. I think some of you guys saw me when I was demoing. I was like, hey, I'm showing some VR for the first time, and people would like say hi and all that kind of stuff, because I just invite other people so they could see what social VR was, which was why I had to bring 2 laptops and Odysseys, and it was just like I had back problems at the end of the trip, actually, because of how heavy the stuff was. But yeah, so I went all over the country, and I actually met Pope LePo for the first time as well, so that was really fun. I went to Seattle, but yeah, and so then now I've started this company, Very Real Help, and our future research is kind of focused on that virtual reality can help with substance use and other populations. I'll get back to that in a second. Hold on. Yes. So Very Real Help is the company, and basically we're building this an app to treat mental health disorders and help people in virtual reality. So kind of doing all the stuff that we've been talking about in the research in the virtual environment, and helping people and stuff like that. And we actually have a survey as well. So if anyone's shameless self-promotion, but if you go to veryrealhelp.com, you can take our 10-question survey as well, and also put your email in if you're interested in kind of this area of getting mental health support and stuff. But future research, lastly, is we need to do a randomized control trial, so I'm applying for a grant for that. We think that virtual reality will help people stay sober, and we're going to target medication-assisted therapy. So there's people with opioid use disorder who are getting medication, and we're going to kind of target that group. And yeah, so I just want to thank my mentor, Steve Holland, as well, and then the research assistants who ran everything. This is Brian, who is the clinical director at the rehab center where I work. And then Gur and Callum are the two amazing developers who are actually building the Very Real Help now. And we have like an app and everything. So yeah, but let me see. Yeah, so that's the survey link. And then also if you guys have questions. But yeah, if you guys have any other questions too, any last questions or anything, we can wrap up and then we can talk after. But yeah. Cool, guys. Well, thank you very much. And we need to take a group pick. So hold on. With the
yeah.
Hold on, let me turn off security.
Barriers off?
Yes, barriers off.
I'm testing it.
Woo! I'm up on stage. Tested it. Woo.
Yay!
Wait, hold
Thanks, guys. They were great questions and discussions, so that was amazing.
Hey, get down low.
Yeah, I was hanging out with a whole bunch of people, and I was like, oh shit, I'm missing Endgame. Oh no!
Yeah, thanks for coming. I was excited to see you. See all of you guys.
Fingers.
All right, guys, we're gonna take a picture.
Buddy.
Hey, Zarni, everyone, get over. Yeah. J Ragged.
Come on, guys, we have to take a photo.
Come on, Dragon.
Everyone.
Down.
Oi, you, Nova, over here. No.
Nova. Nova.
Nova, come on. Don't fucking be your
Come on, boy, Nova.
It's okay.
Okay, hey, come up here. No, there's another sheepbed.
So it's nice getting up.
You guys,
There's some
come
sort
on.
of Scottish guy in there, isn't it?
Group picture, come on. All right.
Yo, come on. Wait, we'll get that sheepbed.
They did
Nova.
Hey,
Yeah,
puppy.
he
Come
Oh my god.
All right, Ghoster. Ghoster. Do you want to give us a countdown?
Hold
You know what I'm
on.
talking?
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna. Oh, he's gonna do a silent countdown because.
Whatever. It's not.
Wait, what are we
it's
saying,
not called
though?
Ghoster,
Wait, what?
bro.
Oh,
It's
index.
NDR.
Pancakes.
It's on the index.
Cheese. These three friends up there.
Okay, say cheese on 3. 3, 2,
Shiba.
1.
The creator of the
Cheese.
Cheese. Go fuck yourself. I didn't like the tacos.
Thanks, guys.
The Shiva.
Nice.
It's great, Noah. Great, Psych.
Thanks, guys.
Hey,
Good to see you, man.
Yeah.
Can I
it's
suck?
Good.
Yes.
I saw.
It's good.
I just looked to do the psychology of
Animation and movement, yeah.
I'm seriously, the animation
Wikipedia.
community is
It's
really,
been a while,
gonna be
actually.
really interested in your
You
study.
shit.
Yeah,
What do you think you're doing?
Last time they got